Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving into the world of anxious attachment today with Jessica Baum's book, Anxiously Attached.
Yeah, it's a topic that I think a lot of people will relate to, even if they don't quite know what it is.
Yeah, for sure. And today we're going to be extracting the key takeaways so you don't have to, go to therapy or
Oh,
anything.
exactly.
So you might already know a little bit about anxious attachment, but let's jump into some of the less obvious things about it.
Okay.
Baum actually points out that even like over-involved parenting can contribute to anxious tendencies,
Oh, absolutely.
which is kind of interesting, right?
It is, because if you think about it, if your parents are constantly hovering and anticipating your every need,
Mm.
you're not really learning to navigate things on your own. And that dependence can turn into anxiety when you're faced with like separation or the possibility of someone being emotionally unavailable.
So it's like rather than promoting self-sufficiency, it's actually creating fragility
Exactly.
in relationships. Have you seen that in your work?
Oh, absolutely. It's often a surprise to them when they start to connect those dots.
Yeah.
They might have had really loving parents who were just maybe a little too involved and unintentionally sort of stunted their ability to develop that secure sense of self.
It's so interesting how even like the best intentions can sometimes backfire
Yeah.
in ways that you don't expect. So Baum talks about the cycle of anxious attachment. And I think this is where things get kind of dicey, especially when it comes to romantic relationships.
You're right. It's not a constant state of anxiety, but it's more like a pattern that gets activated in specific situations.
Okay.
Things that might seem insignificant to others can trigger a cascade of feelings in someone with anxious attachment.
Give me an example. What kind of small thing could set this off?
So imagine your partner takes a little bit longer than usual to reply to a text.
Mm.
For someone who's secure, it's no big deal, but for someone with anxious attachment,
Mm.
their mind might start racing, coming up with all the worst case scenarios.
Like, oh my gosh, they're ignoring me.
That's
or
exactly.
know what's going on.
And it's because there's often a history of feeling abandoned or emotionally neglected.
Right.
So their nervous system is kind of on high alert.
It's like their internal alarm system is going off.
Exactly.
Like danger when there might not be any.
Right. And that's where the cycle starts to spiral, because then that initial trigger leads to all these intense emotions.
Huh.
And those emotions then fuel a bunch of reactions that can actually be damaging to the relationship.
So Baum talks about things like, texting excessively or trying to control your partner's actions, which seem like pretty common things that people do when they're feeling insecure.
Absolutely. And while they might feel like ways to cope with that anxiety in the moment,
Right.
they often create more distance and conflict in the relationship.
So there's like the self-fulfilling prophecy where you're so afraid of abandonment that you end up pushing people away.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad.
Yeah.
But what I find fascinating is that Baum points out that this cycle can affect all kinds of relationships, not just romantic ones.
Oh, excellent.
So how does this play out in like a friendship?
Let's say you have a friend who doesn't respond to your text right away.
Mm-hmm.
Someone with anxious attachment might jump to conclusions thinking, oh, they're ignoring me. They don't care about me.
Right.
And they might bombard their friend with messages, or they become really withdrawn and resentful.
So rather than just accepting that their friend might be busy, they just go right to that
Yeah, their anxiety takes over.
anxious place.
And it can strain the friendship.
Yeah. And that's just friendships. It can happen with family dynamics, work relationships. Like
It can seep into all these different areas.
it can impact how you relate to pretty much everyone around you.
Exactly. And that's why understanding these patterns and triggers is so important,
Go ahead.
because once you see them, you can start to change them.
And that's what we're going to talk about next. How to break free from this cycle. Stay tuned. All right. So we've talked about how this cycle can kind of infiltrate like all these different parts of your life. But the good news is Baum offers some really practical strategies for breaking free.
Yeah, and she really emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and self-regulation.
Yeah, which makes sense, right?
It does. It starts with recognizing your patterns. You know, those specific triggers that set off those familiar feelings of anxiety.
Okay.
Baum suggests keeping a journal and actually tracking these triggers.
Mm-hmm.
It can be really eye-opening to see those patterns laid out in front of you.
Yeah, it's like you're shining a light on all those subconscious reactions that we have
Exactly.
that are kind of running the show.
And once you have that awareness, you can start to develop healthier coping mechanisms.
Okay, so what are some of those?
Mindfulness plays a big role.
Mm-hmm.
Learning to be present in the moment, observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment, can be really powerful.
So it's like you're creating a pause button almost
Exactly.
before you react.
You're not getting swept away by that initial wave of panic, you know?
Right.
You're creating some space to actually choose a different response.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So Baum also talks about grounding exercises.
Hmm.
Can you give us an example of one?
Sure. One simple but effective technique is what's called the 5-4-3-2-1 method.
Okay.
Basically, you're engaging all 5 of your senses to ground yourself in the present moment.
Okay.
So you notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch,
Mm-hmm.
3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste.
I love that it's so easy to remember, too.
Yeah.
You can do it anywhere.
And the more you practice these techniques, the better equipped you'll be to handle those triggers when they pop up.
It's like you're building up that muscle.
Exactly. It's about building that emotional resilience so you're not constantly at the mercy of your fears.
Okay, so that's like the in-the-moment stuff. But what about the long game? Like, how do we move beyond just managing anxiety and start to actually, like, build more secure connections?
Well, that's the heart of Chapter 5, where Baum guides us towards healing and growth.
Okay.
She talks about the journey towards building secure attachment, which is kind of the opposite of anxious attachment.
Mm.
It's where you start to trust yourself and others, and you feel safe enough to be vulnerable without that constant fear of rejection.
That sounds great, but how do we actually get there?
Open and honest communication is key.
Okay.
Talk to your loved ones about your needs and fears.
Yeah.
Setting healthy boundaries is also crucial.
Right, like having those conversations can be so difficult when you are coming from that place of like fear and insecurity.
Absolutely. And, therapy can be immensely helpful in this process.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Sometimes we need that outside perspective
Right.
to help us break out of those patterns.
Exactly.
I love that Baum gives us all these exercises to like actually put these ideas into practice. What are some of the things she recommends?
One key concept is what's called cognitive restructuring.
Okay.
And it's about challenging those negative, anxious thoughts that are fueling the cycle.
So it's like you're becoming a detective for your own mind.
Exactly. You're identifying those distorted thoughts and replacing them with more realistic and balanced ones.
Does she give any examples of what this looks like in real life?
Yeah, there's a powerful story in the book about a woman named Sarah who used therapy and mindfulness to completely transform her relationships.
Okay.
Sarah was someone who constantly sought reassurance, overanalyzed everything, and often pushed people away out of fear of getting hurt.
Oh, yeah. That's so relatable for a lot of people.
Yeah,
It's like this self-sabotaging behavior.
exactly. And through therapy, she learned to identify her triggers and challenge her negative thought patterns.
Mm-hmm.
She started to see that many of her fears were based on past experiences and weren't necessarily reflective of her current reality.
So it's like recognizing that those old patterns don't serve you anymore,
Exactly.
and you can rewrite the script.
Mm.
Did she also use those mindfulness techniques that we were talking about?
Yeah, mindfulness became a key part of her healing journey.
Mm.
It helped her manage her anxiety in the moment and create a sense of calm amidst all the chaos.
That's amazing. What happened?
Well, eventually, Sarah learned to trust herself and her partner and built a more secure and fulfilling relationship.
So even if you struggled with this your whole life, you can change.
Exactly.
It's not a life sentence.
It's about taking ownership of your patterns, developing those self-regulation skills, and making a conscious effort to build healthier connections.
Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into anxiously attached Baum, leaves us with a really thought-provoking question.
She asks, what's one small step you can take today to start building more secure connections?
That's a good question. It's so simple, but it's so powerful.
It really, it could be something as simple as resisting the urge to send that 10th text when you haven't heard back,
Yeah.
or just consciously practicing gratitude for the people in your life.
Like taking a moment to appreciate what you have.
Yeah, or maybe it's finally reaching out to a therapist or
Mhm.
setting a boundary in a relationship that feels a little suffocating.
It's about taking that first step,
Right,
however small it might seem.
Yeah, and building that momentum.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into anxiously attached, let's just recap some of the key takeaways,
Okay.
just to make sure you're walking away with all the good stuff.
Absolutely.
So first we talked about how anxious attachment develops,
Right.
often stemming from those early childhood experiences.
And it's not your fault,
Right.
but it is something you can understand and address.
Yeah, and recognizing those patterns and triggers is super important.
Is.
Knowing what sets off those familiar feelings of anxiety.
Right.
That's that first step towards being able to manage them.
Exactly.
And then it's about building those self-regulation skills.
So mindfulness grounding exercises.
Yeah, all those tools that can help you kind of ride those waves of anxiety without getting totally swept away.
And for the long term, it's all about building that secure attachment.
So learning to trust yourself,
Trust others.
communicating openly, creating that space for vulnerability.
Absolutely.
And we can't forget about therapy.
Yeah, therapy can be so helpful.
Sometimes you need that outside perspective.
Yeah, to help untangle those patterns.
So if you're feeling inspired to explore this topic even further, definitely check out Jessica Baum's book, Anxiously Attached.
Yeah, we just scratched the surface here.
We did.
There's so much more in the book.
And remember that question we talked about earlier?
What's one small step you can take today to start building more secure connections?
Hold on to that question.
Let it simmer.
See what comes up for you.
It's an invitation to take action.
It is.
And however small that step might seem,
It can make a difference.
it can create a ripple effect.
So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of anxious attachment.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit empowering.
We hope so.
And until next time, keep diving deep and keep nurturing those meaningful connections in your life.